Welcome to Future Ready Live, where we talk about topics that will help CPAs, CGMAs, finance and accounting pros prepare for change and transformation. Today, we're going to talk about the journey to becoming a value-added CFO. And joining me is my colleague, Scott Spiegel, CFO for the AICPA SEMA, a global nonprofit with 600,000 members. He's a CPA, CGMA, and CITP, just like me. Drives the global growth strategy and digital finance transformation. He leads efforts to transform the finance function into a key value creator and revenue generator for the business. And say hello, Scott.
Hey, Tom. Thanks for having me. This is so exciting to be with you. So I'm looking forward to the discussion.
It's awesome to have you here. And ever since I've joined, I've been thinking about just how big the organization is and what the role that you have and what all the changes that you must have seen. So I'm really excited to start talking about this.
Yeah, same here.
We want to start with your journey. Share a little bit about your journey. I know you started out as an auditor.
Yeah.
And then you moved into controller up to the CFO of this global organization. So tell us about how you got here.
Yeah, it's a great question, Tom. I never woke up one day and said, I want to be the CFO of a company. But when I was a kid, probably two things helped shape me. One, I was always fascinated with sports, and I'll explain why that's important in a second. But I was also fascinated with business. So as a sports-oriented kid, but knew I wasn't going to play any sort of sport at the collegiate or professional level, I was thinking, well, from a career perspective, how do I get involved in sports? So I narrowed my focus to be on accounting, and I thought I was going to be an accountant and a lawyer. So I go to college, graduate with my accounting degree, sit for the CPA exam. And I think like most people, even today, who are struggling with the decision of, do I continue my education and get saddled more with debt, or do I go into the workforce? I made the decision to sort of give up on my younger dreams of doing both. I then went full force into the accounting track. So after studying for the CPA exam after graduation, I went right into public accounting. As you said, I was in the audit practice. I was there for about 8 years, and then left and went on to the other side of the ship to see how controllership and ultimately now CFO works. And for me, being fascinated about business and being in accounting, I think for me, I always wanted to see what it looked like on the business side from both the public and the management accounting side. And I just felt if I didn't explore both, I would be doing myself a disservice. So my journey is really that simple, just trying to scratch an itch as a younger age and then ultimately just going for it.
Now, all right, so the sports thing, were you going to go into sports accounting and advising kind of thing? Is that what?
I wanted to be a bilingual sports agent. So that was my original passion. So I was thinking about being a lawyer and an accountant, CPA, and then also minoring in Spanish. I got 6 credits short of doing that and then realized the accounting curriculum was so rigorous, I just couldn't find the balance to do accounting as my major, Spanish as my minor. I changed my minor a bit. I still speak a little bit of Spanish, but I've never blended the Spanish, the law, and the accounting together to do my sports agent dream. But CFO of my current company is where I'm at right now. That's pretty cool. So there's one of my former colleagues at the Maryland Association of CPAs, Rebecca Brown. That's the reason she got into accounting, is she wanted to get into football. She always wanted to be working with an NFL team, so she wanted to get into sports management. She went to The Ohio State, and now she's director of development for the Maryland Association of CPA. So she never quite made that pivot into the sports arena, but she had the same kind of aspirations like you were doing. She was thinking about the idea of sports agent and sports accounting. But isn't it amazing though? And I'm sure we'll touch on this as we continue the dialogue. It's amazing to me what a background in accounting can do and just the doors that it opens, where I think people look at accounting as some traditional path, and there really is no traditional path.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's worth pointing out in a big way, that accounting is the language of business. And so it does open any kind of doors. And so for you, thinking about sports, Rebecca, I'll never forget a young lady. She's in the Eastern Shore. She's just finished our board term at the Maryland Association of CPAs. She worked for South Moon Under, a fashion store. And well, I remember we interviewed her, and she said, I had a passion for fashion. And she said, instead of being like a clothes designer, she went into the accounting side, and she
Yeah.
accounted for retail in a really kind of cool fashion shop for probably about 10 years. And
It's why I love this profession, because
yeah,
it opens up so many possibilities. And even for people who choose not to go down this path, just a basic understanding of accounting, because you're right, it's the language of business. It's so important.
yeah. All right. So now let's pivot to say, what do you think the biggest challenges that you and our colleagues face as CFOs today?
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard not to even think about this without starting with the pandemic, right? So I think navigating the pandemic is probably the most pertinent topic at the moment, and just making sure that we're doing everything that we can to keep everything straight. We're financially successful and viable, and making the right decisions on a go-forward basis. So I think first it's just navigating through the pandemic. But I think secondarily, as a result of the pandemic, there's been other things like the compliance angle with, things here in the U.S. with PPP. It could be tax changes. It could be even on the accounting standards side. I think just navigating that compliance angle, just the complexity that compliance brings, would probably be my second point. I would say third, cyber and cybersecurity and cyber attacks. It's almost every day. Our boss is constantly talking about just the importance of cybersecurity, and I just think from our own perspective, thinking about cyber is really important. And then I just think fourth, digital transformation and being part of that revolution. You almost cannot be waking up nowadays not thinking about that digital revolution, because if you're not, you will be left behind.
And then I know, Scott, because I've been watching the meetings where you're presenting the financials and talking about. So a couple of things. I mean, the integrated report you guys did is amazing, and I know that'll be released at some point to members. But just real quick, touch on that. What does that mean, and what was your role in that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting notion. It's a really great way to look at your audited report from both a financial and a non-financial aspect. And I do think as we start thinking about the future for CFOs, blending that financial and non-financial aspect and outlook of where the company is going is super important. As far as my role, there's certainly a critical role and integration between the finance teams, anybody who's involved in setting strategy, and in our case, our corporate communications team really help pull that integrated report together. But it's a labor of love, sometimes a labor of pain, but a labor of love. And as you mentioned, it has a lot of great information to talk about successes that the company had, and then it navigates into the numbers. But sometimes you lose sight of all of that really good stuff that's non-financial, and an integrated report's a great way to kind of bring that more complete picture.
Yeah, the whole idea of the six capitals. I mean, I think it's just brilliant, because it's not just about financial, and it's not just about your physical plant, if you will, and what you're quote manufacturing. It's
Right.
a lot more than that, and fits into the whole triple bottom line notion and everything, right? So that's pretty cool, and it's good that you're and us we're taking a lead on that. All right, now let's go to the value added component. You talked about those top challenges, but I noticed you really didn't get to how many times Barry came into your office or virtually came into your office and said, what's the projection, Scott, for this or that? So talk about value added partnering. And
Yeah, it's so funny, because these 4 or 5 things that were probably top of mind for me are really important. So you're all right. I think particularly as a result of the pandemic, you have to be front and center as a value added CFO to be right on top of the numbers. How are we doing? What does the forecast look like? What's our cash position look like? Et cetera, et cetera. And I think at least what we found, and I think most value-added CFOs are finding, is the frequency in which you're forecasting and projecting now is probably much more current and more regular than you probably were pre-pandemic. And I think it's a really good lesson, though, about how you have to stay on top of that. So I'd say first and foremost, it's front and center on performance. I would say second, and you read this everywhere, but the CFO that's value added has to be a strategic advisor to the org. There's just no way around how involved the CFO today has to be there, setting strategy, setting direction, making decisions. I think
Now,
third, embracing data and data analytics. And I'm sure you have a question for me, so go ahead.
no, go, so tell me more about the data and data analytics, because I know I've seen what your dashboards you're working on, all those kind of things. What are you using and how are you doing that?
Yeah, we're right now we're leveraging Excel and probably just some version of Power BI, which is a
Mhm.
Microsoft tool. But it's hard because transitioning from grabbing data and doing data analysis in Excel to really visualizing the data is now the big transition. So I think data analysis is super important, but the visualization of the data is really important because the audiences that we're talking to sometimes don't have finance or accounting backgrounds, and sometimes we can get lost in the numbers. So I think a value add CFO is really embracing that visualization aspect of data. And then I just say with fourth, we have to grab that growth and innovation mindset. I think, at times it's so easy for us to be sometimes hunkered down in just the numbers or cost efficiencies, and that is super important. But a real value added CFO is now embracing the other side, how to invest in growth, how to innovate, and making sure that we're pushing there for members, our customers, CFOs, customers, et cetera. So I think embracing that growth and innovation mindset really helps make that CFO a value add.
So how much time or how much more time do you think over the last few years are you spending in the business versus in the finance team?
Oh, you get two different answers. From my perspective, I spend way less in the numbers now, and that's a shift that as you're rising through the ranks, you actually have to get comfortable with it, and sometimes it's uncomfortable, particularly when there are large scale presentations that we're making, et cetera, where I really want to be more in the details. So I would say I spend way less time in the details than years ago. And I do think that that's actually a big shift as you move from an auditor to a controller to a CFO, and that progression of really detailed to almost less focused on numbers and more on strategy is the pivot that I think a lot of CFOs have to make.
And how did you make time for that? Like, how did you make the shift? Because, right, you had to start shifting stuff and delegating and then moving up that value chain like we all talk about. What was that like for you?
It's not easy. I mean, honestly, it's really not easy because when you start off your career as an auditor, you're really in that professional skepticism mindset and really scrutinizing and looking at every little thing. As you become a controller, I think sometimes that mindset shifts also to, protect and risk, and it's sometimes hard to let go. The lessons that I had to learn was trust your people and make sure you're delegating. And I think that sort of soft skill empowerment is super important because it's so easy to say, well, I did it this way and tell people what to do. But there is such a unique difference between somebody who is a leader by title and can lead by influence. And I think that's a shift CFOs have to learn to make, is that pivot from dictating to empowering. And, that just takes time.
That's so important. That is really, really cool. All right. Now let's talk about this advice. If there's a CFO out there who's thinking that he or she wants to evolve their role into this value added CFO value partner, where would you tell them to start? What do they do Monday morning?
Well, there's a few things that I would say. One is constantly learn. You have got to go on your own time, read, and keep reading. So for me, I make sure almost every night I carve out maybe 30 minutes or so to read about all of these hot topics that are emerging. Some of them are very confusing. Blockchain, by example. I can't tell you I have a full grasp of blockchain. What I can tell you is I try to read about that and crypto assets and all of these other hot topics very frequently. So I'd say one, read and learn. I would say two, try to find a coach or a mentor. I think it's so important to find somebody you really trust, who is going to give you honest and candid feedback, and develop that open relationship with him or her. Because once you find that person who you trust, you can really start exposing yourself to, I'm struggling, I'm X. And I think sometimes looking at your own areas for improvement with somebody you trust is super important. And then I say three, and you are very, very good at this about, just increasing your network. But I think increasing your network, it could be on a social platform, but it could just be Zoom calls or, other, just picking up the telephone or texting. I think having that network of people that you can rely on for information and advice is really important. So I would say learn, coach, and network would be maybe my three tips.
Wow, good stuff there. And it's funny because I just did the social CFO session for AICPA CFO conference, and one of my sayings now is your network is your net worth. So connecting all the people inside the organization. I know you have a tremendous amount of respect across all the people that I've met since I've been here. And I know you have a good network outside, and you're helping us on a couple of exciting projects. So yeah, that's pretty cool. All right, last one. How is the role going to change? What's the future CFO going to look like?
I never would have thought 3 years ago I'd be using the word crypto in any kind of conversation. So for me, I think things and topics like crypto assets and blockchain, there's some very financial and then non-financial topics that I think are going to continue to disrupt and evolve the CFO space. So between blockchain and crypto assets, I would say that those are, quasi-financial. But I think on the non-financial side, there's probably two things that I can think of. One is the whole movement in ESG, on environmental social governance. This is, I think, now going to be the next big thing, and how we look at not just corporate sustainability, but environmental sustainability and how we bring that together, I think is going to be a hot topic. And then I would say culture. So human resources is usually a big component of a financial officer's roles and responsibilities. But I think there's now a shift between driving financial performance and now driving a culture that's diverse and inclusive. And I really think that that's going to be an interesting shift for CFOs because, again, it's not financial, but it's now almost table stakes at this point that we start embracing both financial but also cultural driven performance.
Wow, good. So amazing, good stuff. And I think I would say you're spot on. Those are things that are bubbling up. I know the association's doing some research on some of those. So we might be having you back as you get more involved in those kind of initiatives. But thank you so much for being with us today, Scott. I mean, so as you are listening to this, he hit a whole bunch of key pieces, but the whole idea of value added, I think the notion of, as you said, building your network, learning constantly, focusing on culture. I mean, there's just so many takeaways here. So I hope those of you who are in that early stages of the career might have to listen to this 2 or 3 times and take some really heavy notes. So you can follow him on LinkedIn at Scott H. Spiegel, Spiegel. And Scott, thank you so much for joining me. And don't miss our other Future Ready Live sessions. So say bye to everybody, Scott. This has been amazing. And
it's been awesome. Thanks for having me, Tom. I hope I can do it again.
All right, so I'll be back here on LinkedIn the first and third Tuesday of every month at noon Eastern. #Future Ready Live, and we'll see you then. Thank you.